Hi everyone, I'm here with Alice Marie Johnson, who's written a book called Afterlife, forward by Kim Kardashian West, because it was because of her that your case was brought to the attention of President Trump. You were granted clemency after serving 21 years of a life sentence in federal prison. Thank you so much for talking with us, Alice. And before I ask you about so many things and about your backstory and about what prison life was like, a lot of people following me on social media wanted to know, what was it like when you were finally let out of prison? Can you describe that feeling for us, one that I'm sure you'll never forget?
Yes. When I received the call, I don't know if you know that Kim is the one who told me that I had been granted clemency by the president. When she told me the news, the weight of almost 22 years lifted off my back. That weight that I had been carrying, all of a sudden, I felt weightless. I could hardly believe it. But then when I saw my family waiting for me, this joy was leaping in my heart, and everyone probably saw me take off running across the street into their arms. So it's indescribable.
I was going to say, it's probably impossible to find the words to describe what your heart felt.
And also, hearing the women celebrate so loudly, I go into details in my book, the moment by moment of what took place on that day. And it's a feeling, a sound I'll never forget. Women were in every window, in every cell, beating on the window, screaming my name, crying out. I mean, it sounded like an earthquake. They were just crying. It was amazing.
They were so happy for you.
They were so happy for me.
And there's a reason they were so happy for you, and one of those reasons is you lived a life of incredible service during your time in prison. You did so many things for the other inmates, Alice. You became a pastor. Tell us some of the things that you did while you were incarcerated.
Well, I wrote plays.
Right.
The plays that I wrote were the largest participation programs in the prison, original plays. And the outside public came in to see those plays. I'd have to do 4 performances. They would be ticketed events.
Yeah.
I mean, the outside public is coming in to see me and to see the group of women who put together something unbelievable. And many of these women I mentored, I showed them what they could do. And they were so proud of themselves to be able to say, I have value and I'm doing something I never even knew that I could do. And so many of them were encouraged to do other things. To just see them blossom was an amazing thing for me. I sat with women in hospice who were dying because I did not want them to die alone. There's something about just losing all dignity, to be in a lonely place and have to die alone. So I became a hospice volunteer. I choreographed dance. I started writing for outside women's ministries. Mm-hmm. And I became an ordained minister while I was in prison, and that was really unheard of. I mean, literally in prison.
Right.
I challenged myself with things that I could do to prepare myself for a future outside of prison. I became certified in electrical. I took all type of classes while I was there. I taught classes.
Wow.
I put together a women's program for women over 50 for their health. I became a certified trainer.
You did so much.
Mm-hmm.
And did you find, Alice, that was the best antidote for what I'm sure were some very dark days for you?
That was. Because in encouraging others, I encouraged myself too.
I know that some people wanted to know, they said, how did you cope and get through each day without cracking? I mean, there must have been moments where you felt so hopeless. I mean, here you were looking at a life sentence without parole.
Yes, I was told that I would only leave prison as a corpse. I was told that I would take my last dying breath in prison.
And so, did you, I mean, how did you not crack? How did you not actually just lose your mind?
Honestly, it was my faith in God. I'm a praying woman. I came from, and also my family kept me encouraged. And it seemed like every time that it was going to turn to no hope, we get more hope. And so, as the years passed, and I became of service to others, and I focused on making the place where I'm at better, a better place for other people. And really, that's what life is about. Wherever you are, if you can do good, do it.
Well, you're such an incredible role model, and no wonder all your fellow prisoners were so elated for you.
They were so happy.
When this happened. I want people to understand a little bit about your backstory, Alice, because I think sometimes it gets lost
Yes.
in the story of you being granted clemency and your association with Kim Kardashian West. And you were given a life sentence for a nonviolent drug offense.
My first ever.
Your first ever. You were an information mule.
Yes.
For a drug ring that I guess operated in Houston and Memphis.
Yes.
And Memphis is where you were living at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what does an information mule do exactly?
You pass messages, you pass numbers. Not even messages. I didn't pass messages, I passed numbers. They called my number. I don't know who is on the other end of the phone, and I would say, this is the number that you need to call. So I shared numbers. I connect so that what they do is they find people so that there's no connection between the two.
Right.
If one goes down, they can't connect them to someone else. And so the person who's a telephone mule or the information mule, they don't have that. You can't testify against them because you don't know who they are.
So you were, the reason why you started doing this, and you write about this
Yes.
in the book, you were desperate. You had been a manager at FedEx
Yes, I
for 10 years,
10 years.
right?
Mhm.
Then you made a series of bad choices.
Yes.
You got involved with a bad guy. He borrowed money you'd been given as an advance
Mhm.
for a business trip. He lost at gambling. He couldn't give it back to you. You got fired. You filed for bankruptcy. Your house was foreclosed on. Your car repossessed. You had an ex-husband who didn't pay a lick of child support for your 5
Yes.
children. And you were a desperate woman.
Very desperate. When I think back on that time, Katie, I can't recognize myself as a person who would even make that decision. It was a crazy time in my life. Just desperate time, and I don't make any excuses because many people find themselves in desperate situations. But when things are snowballing, one thing after the other, I didn't go seeking this. It came to me as an offer.
Right. It was from your cousin.
Yes.
Who then connected with this
Uh-huh.
bad guy that you'd been involved with.
Mhm.
And suddenly you found yourself in the middle of this.
Very much in the middle of it. And the incredible thing is the very people that I was connecting their numbers, all of a sudden they get caught, and I've got the phone records, so they make me be their boss.
Right. And in fact, a lot of the people who were running the operation cooperated with the government.
Yes, they've been at home for years. They could even recognize me in the courtroom.
They didn't recognize
No,
you.
they pointed out my co-defendant and say, that's Alice.
Oh, so you were that far removed from the operation, but because they cooperated, they got much reduced sentences.
Yes, very.
And you were
close.
kind of portrayed as the kingpin of the operation.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Well, in a conspiracy, you are charged with every action that every person in the conspiracy does. So that's how the law for the federal system is written. A conspiracy, you're looped into everything.
So in 1996, you are sentenced to life in prison.
Without the possibility of parole.
And I cannot imagine what that moment was like. I know your whole family was in the courtroom.
Yes.
And can you take me back to when you heard that?
Well, I had already received the paperwork right before my sentencing, and it showed the recommended time based upon the pre-sentence report.
So you had an idea this was coming?
I didn't believe it though. I'm thinking that this is still, it's got to be wrong. And even when I heard it, I still couldn't believe it. My family, when they heard it, they thought that this can't be true. My elderly parents were there, my children were there, and it was a moment that I'll never forget. It was a moment of silence first. It was dead silence when the judge first pronounced my sentence. And then all of a sudden, all I could hear was weeping. I mean, terrible weeping, and I knew it was coming from my family.
When you served time in 2 different institutions.
3.
Is that 3 different? Where were they?
The first institution was in Dublin, California, and 1,500 miles away from my family. The next one was Texas, Carswell, Texas, and the last one, Alabama.
And so your family had a difficult time.
Oh, yes.
Visiting you, so
Yes.
that must have been heartbreaking for you. And I know that in a video, which I'll talk about in a second, interview you did from prison, you talked about both your parents passing away, and of course you then had grandchildren
Yes.
and great-grandchildren while you were incarcerated.
Yes.
Were there many women like you, Alice? Because obviously this sort of minimum maximum for first-time drug offenders, these really harsh sentences have now been revisited.
Yes.
And there is so much work going on in this area. And I was just curious, did you meet a lot of women in your same position?
Yes.
Tell me about that, because it also disproportionately affects African Americans in this country. Can you explain to people why this is such a serious issue in the criminal justice system?
Well, mandatory minimums were put in place during the whole war on drugs era.
Right.
That I really call a war on families and a war on communities. It was put in place it's like putting a rubber stamp. There's no discretion. Nothing is taken into consideration that you might be a first-time offender, your background. There's no risk assessment to society. So you're snatching people out of their communities. Most of the time, the women had children. Someone has to take care of the children. Oftentimes, the government's going to take care of the children because many of them were single mothers like me. So my coming out, my case has put a magnifying glass on the need for meaningful criminal justice reform and not just giving something small. So I think that people didn't realize that this was even possible until they saw my case. The American public eyes have been opened, and I'm glad that my face is the face that has opened their eyes.
In fact, I was just going to say that you became the face of this huge issue that people were hearing about but couldn't really relate or truly understand. When they see a woman like you have a life sentence without parole for passing out numbers, and then a lot of the other people who are much more intimately involved spend much less time in prison. What changes need to happen, Alice, in the criminal justice system to make it more fair and equitable and not to penalize people who don't deserve this kind of punishment? And by the way, we have such a huge problem with mass incarceration,
Yes.
overcrowded prisons, and
Yes.
that just doesn't seem to be the best way to handle many
it's
of these
not.
situations.
It is not. Prison is not the answer for everyone. It really is not. There are people with mental health issues, people who their crimes they should not receive those type of sentences, especially the sentence like I received. A life sentence is the next worst thing to the death penalty. The first thing that I think needs to happen is parole needs to come back. There's parole
in the federal system.
In the federal system, there's parole in every state, but no parole for the federal prisoners. What is the difference, Katie, between a state prisoner and a federal prisoner?
Why is that, by the way, Alice?
It was eliminated, I think in the 90s. We lost parole in the federal system. All of the craziness that was going on with the war on drugs, I believe, played a part in that. I can't say for sure, but parole left. Many times laws change and they're not retroactive. While I was in prison, some things changed, but they didn't affect me because they weren't retroactive. There needs to be more rehabilitative things that take place. The First Step Act that's recently passed, was signed into law, is going to solve some of those problems, but not all of it. That was the first step, but there also needs to be other steps.
And they need to help with recidivism, but by
Yes.
helping prisoners who are released, look at all the support you got.
Yes.
But how little support so many prisoners get when it comes to rebuilding their lives.
That is a step that is very necessary. Most of the prisoners will be returning back into society. They're going to be your neighbors. Do you want them to have a really strong second chance at life to reintegrate back into society successfully, or do you want to lock them out of jobs? So I'm hoping that employers will take the challenge and start giving returning citizens, because that's who we are, an opportunity for a second chance. And for me, there were challenges that I met: insurance, getting identification. It was really hard. It's like I was wiped off of everything after I was 22 years. So there needs to be things in place to help returning citizens. They're locked out of getting government assistance, housing. They can't get that if you have a drug charge. You can't, certain renters won't rent to you.
In 10 states, a convicted felon can't vote,
Yes,
right?
they cannot vote. And how can you say that you've already paid your debt to society? Now, restore the rights to vote. Restore citizenship. Don't just half do it. Do it full-heartedly.
And I think you'd have a lot fewer problems with recidivism if you gave people who were released from prison a fighting chance to make it on their own, and less likely that they would return to a life of criminal activity.
That's right. That's right.
Let's talk about Kim Kardashian, because, you know, when she first got interested in your case, you had no idea who she was.
None whatsoever.
Which is so funny. So your daughter, I guess, had seen her television show, and
Yes.
she explained, oh, that's Kim Kardashian. You all figured it out because I guess your daughter Googled her lawyer
Yes.
and saw that the lawyer was involved in
Yes,
the
because-
OJ case, right?
Yes, she was involved in the OJ case, and she told me that it was one of her clients who wanted to be my benefactor. So we're trying to figure out who are Sean Hawley's clients. And when I saw the Kardashians and Jenners, I thought it was Kris Jenner.
Oh, but
Yeah.
it was Kim Kardashian. And when you learned that and got to know Kim, because you now have gotten to know her, you know, I think she's so famous that people kind of, I don't think they even feel like she's a real person. But what did you learn about her, getting to know her on a very personal level?
I'm glad that I didn't know who she was, because instead of meeting her as a celebrity, I met her as a friend. And that's who she has become to me, a friend. And in her foreword in my book, that she, by the way, wrote completely herself, she talks about our relationship, that I have become a friend to her and family to her. When I went to visit her, they treated me as a part of their family. It was not strange or weird, or I was ignorant. They're normal people. She's a really sweetheart. I love Kim.
Isn't that nice? And do you wonder, gosh, what would have happened if Kim Kardashian had not heard about my story? Because I know during President Obama's administration, he did commute more sentences than any other president in history, and you kept waiting for your case, and for you to be granted clemency, and it just never happened. And you still don't really know why, do you?
I don't know why, and that's something too. This whole clemency process is shrouded in mystery. You never know why. They don't give you a reason as to why you were denied. I was just denied 3 different times.
And you got letters from so many
From
supporters.
the warden, the
The
captain.
prosecuting attorney who was involved in your case, didn't he
Well,
support
at the
you?
very end, not the prosecuting attorney, but at the very end when I was denied, The last time, the U.S. Attorney wrote a letter asking
President Obama?
to the pardon attorney, saying that I fully support her clemency. Because at first, the person who took me, the prosecutor on my trial, had denied, had just put he didn't recommend it. And that's another thing that's wrong, is you're asking the person who I was in an adversarial relationship with in trial to now say, well, I think she should go on, and that I punished her too severely. So every time I was never
so they don't want to admit their mistakes.
Well, that's what they have to live with, because I don't think that they ever saw, and clemency is about post-conviction. It's about rehabilitation. It's an act of mercy and grace and forgiveness, redemption. And I was just stamped with I was not a risk to society. I had perfect conduct in prison, and I had as incredible support of the people who knew me, the staff members who saw me on a day-to-day basis. And just the whole thing was very disappointing to me, but I still didn't stop fighting. I continued to fight.
Well, you're an amazing woman, Alice. And
Thank
as you know, I wanted to ask you about President Trump, because he did hear your case.
Mm-hmm.
He is responsible for your release from prison. As you know, he's I think, the most controversial president I've witnessed in my lifetime. And I'm curious, after spending time with him, or if you had an opinion of him before, and how you feel about him now, and what other measures you're hoping he may enact as a result of meeting you and hearing about your case.
I don't believe that the president really understood that a person could have a life sentence like mine, or have these long years without having committed a heinous crime. My case opened his eyes up. When Kim presented my case, it wasn't just a celebrity presenting my case. She also had to have a worthy candidate. So she presented a good case to him, and Sean Hawley presented the legal basis of why I should be granted. So it was not them just granting someone just because of celebrity.
Right.
He looked at my case. The White House vetted my case very closely. Jared Kushner had people researching my case. He came on board to fully support my case. So I think it was peeling back the layers and looking at me as a candidate for clemency and making that decision. And one thing too, all the people that I may hear say negative things about the president, they all have this in common. They said, we may not agree with the president, but this was a good thing that he did. They all agree that it was the right thing to release me from prison. And I'm not trying to make myself be a unique person that deserves clemency either. There are so many other people who are incarcerated who also deserve this second chance. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that my book, Afterlife, will do, will educate. It's not only my life story, it's their story. It's the story of so many others like me who are waiting to hear those prison doors swing open for them too.
But do you think that will happen? Because Alice, you said there were so many other women, and I'm sure men in prison,
Yes, men and
like
women.
you, who are serving these really harsh sentences as a result of the war on drugs, who really shouldn't be there. Do you think that this will lead to what you just
I believe
said
it will.
you're hoping for?
Yes, I do believe that. The First Step Act that was passed, it came, I've been told many times that my release served as one of the catalysts to get that passage of that bill, to get the support for this bill. I know many people have worked on it, but my release, I think, was another catalyst to go on and make it happen. There was bipartisan support. That's one thing that all the parties agree upon, is that we need criminal justice reform. The first bill in 30 years was signed into effect. So many people were hopeless that anything would change. That one act can lead to other acts. if we can sit down at the table and find common ground, and that's what is happening with this. And what happened to me is it's caused people to, it's not controversial to the public. And we both know that in politics, you don't want to really do things that the public is against. Well, as they are seeing that the public is for this, it's giving them the courage to do what is right, because this is the right thing to do.
Well, I am so happy to meet you. And how is life? I mean, it must be such an adjustment. Someone wanted to know what was the first thing you did when you got home. And I know in the book you talk about opening up the refrigerator and checking it for what was inside, because it had been so long since you'd been able to really do that. But what is giving you joy now that you're a free woman, Alice?
Being with my family, that is the biggest joy. I still receive so much love from the women who have been released from prison, who did time with me. I've gotten so many cards, so many messages. People have contacted my family to testify. Not one negative thing has been said, except that this woman was here for me. And it's like planting seeds. That has been so sweet for me to actually see the harvest come.
Oh, that's so nice. And will you keep working
Yes,
on
I have
behalf
to.
of these women?
I have to.
And how so?
I'll continue to use the platforms that I have to magnify the need for criminal justice reform. And I'm hoping this book also that is out, that is released May 21st, will be a catalyst too for more people to understand and more people to get behind it, because this is a movement, and this movement is not going to stop.
Well, as I said, but I'll say it again, Alice, you're really a remarkable woman, and I feel truly honored to meet you. And thank you so much for spending some time with us in our little makeshift studio here with our cell phone.
Well, thank you, Katie.
Really, best
Never
of
thought
luck
I'd be
to you.
meeting an incredible woman like you.
Aw, thank you, Alice. It's the Mutual Admiration Society. What can I say? And here, I'll just remind people about your book. It's Alice Marie Johnson, obviously. It's called Afterlife, My Journey from Incarceration to Freedom. And as you said, Kim Kardashian West wrote the foreword. And it made me, really, it brought newfound respect for me of her and made me appreciate, because I always thought she had such a great platform that she could have an incredible influence on the national conversation if she chose something she really wanted to turn her lens on. And I'm so happy she turned it on you.
Me too.
Anyway, all right, thanks everybody. If you have any questions or comments, we tried to get to a lot of your questions. I think I did, but if you have any comments on my interview with Alice, please write to me on this or any platform. I'm there. Bye.